Well, today we have just a beautiful sermon that I've gotten to spend time in Scripture, dissect what I feel the Holy Spirit is telling me, and hopefully what the Holy Spirit is talking to you today. So we're going to begin in the Gospel of Luke with a story that I hope many of you are familiar with, and maybe some of you will really identify with. I'd first like to start with some of the background information on Luke's Gospel and a little bit of the pretext before jumping into our passage today. We're currently in a sermon series titled Pilgrimage. That's for our Lenten season as it leads us into Easter. And it's a good thing we're in Luke's Gospel because one of the biggest themes in Luke throughout the whole book is this theme of Jesus journeying or pilgrimaging to Jerusalem. Just to get a better idea, Luke is only 24 chapters, and this journey that he takes, starting in Galilee, making his way to Jerusalem, is a whopping 10 chapters. Now, again, we'll be in Luke 10 today, and leading up to this passage, I think it's important for us to know what's happening in Luke 1 through 9. If you're in the joint Bible study with me and Margaret, or if you're some of the youth in the room, you know that I always like to read the pretext and even some of the post-text for us to understand the context. So the pretext leading up to Luke 10 shows Jesus' birth and early life, the start of his ministry in Galilee, and all of the miracles and teachings he performs along the way. He's also been affirmed as the true Son of God through the Transfiguration that Chad preached on just a few weeks ago. Another thing we witness in the beginning of chapter 10 is Jesus sending out 70 disciples, and then they return and report all of the wonderful things and miracles that they've seen. And now I have an asterisk by that point because it's another major theme in the Gospel of Luke. There's this idea of we have this preconceived notion of what we think something is, and then Jesus takes it and flips it on top of its head, and we're finally able to see clearly. So now that we've gone through some of those big themes and some of the pretext, we're ready to jump into our text today. Luke 10:38 through 42 says this. Now, as they went on their way, he entered a village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. And she had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came to him and asked, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her." So let's take a look at some of those initial observations. We see a woman named Martha opening up her home to Jesus and some of his followers after part of their journey that they've already done. And this practice is what we all know as hospitality. I'm sure many of you all have hosted people in your homes. Just to get an idea, what are some things that you do to prepare your homes before you have guests arrive? Clean. I had a feeling. What else? Well, Jose? Be organized. That's right. We got to tidy up. What else? Shopping, cooking. Alina? Cooking. Lucia? Your mom makes you fix the pillows? Yeah, so they look, we're trying to present an aesthetic. Gavin, what do you got? Okay, yeah, so sometimes some of us have animals, and maybe animals can freak our guests out, so we kind of put them in another room. Chris and I have a dog, so some of our routine is lighting candles and making sure that it doesn't smell like a dog every time. Heidi, did you have your hand raised? Okay, yeah, calm down. Yeah, we don't want to bombard our guests with high energy. Yeah, don't jump all over them, things like that. Well, it sounds like we have some similar practices. Oh, we've got one more? Yeah? Sweep the floor. Okay, sweeping and mopping. So I love how the very first thing everyone said was cleaning. Martha was probably doing the same thing. So this practice of hospitality in our day and age is very similar to what Mary and Martha and what would happen in Jesus' day and age. They would provide a meal. They'd provide shelter to travelers since they've been on a long journey. They have a place to rest their head for the night. And maybe if they have been traveling, they offer up an opportunity to bathe. or just get cleaned up. And so then we see that Martha begins to busy herself while Mary sits and listens. And then we see Martha react in a way that maybe we all relate to in some kind of way, like if you're the one, preparing the meal and cleaning everything, and then you see maybe those other family members just sitting on the sofa not doing anything, you're like, I'm sorry, does our house not look like a zoo? Do we not have company coming? Am I the only one that's seeing this? And so I think I identify with Martha a little bit too, of this hurriedness, this need to present my home in a certain way. And Martha gets so worked up that she even asks Jesus to enter into this situation and try and resolve this issue between the sisters. And then we see Jesus respond to Martha. Now, we don't necessarily get closure on this scene. The ending is left suspended. We wonder if the sisters reconcile with each other. We might question if Martha takes Jesus' words to heart and finally slows down. And we're not quite sure what Jesus says next. But regardless of the suspended ending, I think there's still some significant ideas and practices that we can glean from this text. Let's take a look back at verse 40. So it says this, "But Martha was distracted by her many tasks." I have these two words highlighted in red for a reason. So today we'll be using a tool called philological criticism, which is just a fancy way of saying that we're going to go back and dissect the meaning of those two highlighted words from their original Greek translation. If you're in youth, we talked about this last week. So the first word we see is the word task, and it comes from the word diakonos or diakonian. This is where we get our word for deacon. It means service, provision of service, relief, or support. And the second word that we see is distracted, which comes from the word periospato, which can be understood as to be pulled and dragged in different directions. Raise your hand if you've ever felt pulled and dragged in different directions. Yeah, okay. So maybe a better way to read this verse is this. But Martha was being pulled and dragged in many directions by her desire to serve and provide support to her guests. So she came to him and asked, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." So I think that really brings the text to life more than that English translation was giving us. I think it gives us a better image that we can find ourselves in as well. We've all hosted people in our homes and maybe felt like Martha. The floor needs to be swept, it needs to be mopped. Those things that didn't quite make them back and the place that they're supposed to be has to be picked up. And sometimes we just got to make sure that those animals are put away and that our guests can enter this home that looks a certain way that maybe it's not always going to look. In some, I think we do kind of start to act like Martha. Next slide. Those distractions prevent us from being truly present. We get wrapped up in these small, minute, and ultimately insignificant things that we might even become annoyed or irritated like Martha when we see our family members not helping us out. But you see, while all of those things are okay, in and of themselves, they're just not the point. Let's take a look at Mary's demeanor in verse 39. She had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. Now, we talked earlier about some of the traditions that would come with hospitality in Jesus' day and age, preparing a meal, offering shelter and rest, and maybe even a time to clean up. But the thing we see here is that Mary just sits and listens. She's able to be fully present with her guest. And if anyone is going to be our guest, it's Jesus, and maybe we should pay attention. This past week, I actually got to talk with Sarah Novak and Aaron, and they let me enter their home. And they have 5 kids, so and it's a mess, and that's okay. That was from Miriam. I'm not saying that's not my judgment. That was from their child and their home. But it's one of those situations where even Sarah texted me prior to my arrival and said, "Hey, our house looks lived in, and I hope that's okay." And I'm like, of course it's okay. I'm not expecting to walk into something that looks like it's on the cover of Southern Living magazine. I'm hoping to have quality time with a friend, to hear what's going on in her life and in the life of her family, and just to see what the Lord has for us in that moment. And that's really what this is all about. Jesus doesn't mind when we get distracted or when we get Jesus doesn't mind if we get distracted sometimes, but what he does care about is when we let those things get to be too much, it becomes our focus rather than giving our full attention to God. For Mary's actions, the text reveals the true, genuine meaning of hospitality. Genuine hospitality is listening. It's about giving gracious attention to our guests instead of tidying up our house and picking at those little things that we see that others might notice. Now, even Mary's actions are a bit subversive for her day and age. The expectation for Mary would to be like Martha. As women, their job would be to clean up, to prepare food, to make sure their home was as spotless and picture perfect as it could be, while also still looking cozy and inviting. But we see Mary take a different place. She assumes the role of a student at the feet of a rabbi, which was traditionally only reserved for men. Now, I won't get on a soapbox today about women in the Bible subverting traditions, but I find it very fascinating that one woman in this story is doing exactly what Jesus hopes everyone would do when he comes to see them. She gives Jesus her full, undivided, undistracted, unpulled in many different directions kind of attention. Jesus has captivated her, and she listens graciously. I think there's some meaning for us there, too. When I got to sit with Sarah and Aaron, and Sarai joined us as well in their garden, we could hear the birds in the air. We could hear spring happening. We saw some butterflies. I watched their really cute cat kind of pounce on an animal, or attempt to pounce on an animal. Grayson. Yeah. I did not see a flying squirrel. But what I did, he was in the attic. But what I did get to experience is the love that friends can have when we open up our hearts and our homes in hospitality to genuinely listen to one another. Let's now take a look at Jesus' response to Martha. But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. And Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her." We see here that even Jesus notices Martha's distress. And this is no longer about Martha's external actions of cleaning or tidying anymore. We know it's not about those external actions because right before this, in the first part of chapter 10, we have the parable of the Good Samaritan, which is all about those action things, meeting the needs of someone who is in need. But Jesus here is concerned with Martha's internal condition. She's distracted, she's worried, she's so upset that she tries to get Jesus, the Messiah, involved in a quarrel between sisters. But right there we see that Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. And I'd like to give Martha some credit. I don't think Jesus is necessarily ridiculing her or disciplining her in a way that is scolding and negative. I think he's just trying to say, "Martha, I think you've missed the point here. Let me gently draw your attention back to what's important. And it's me. I'm right in front of you, and that's what I want you to focus on." Now, what do we think that one thing is? It's not bananas. Before I share what I think that one thing is, I'd like to first walk us through a spiritual practice. So if you have your bulletins, you can get a better look in front of you, or you can take a look at that screen. I've done this practice. It's called Visio Divina. We've done it before. And just as a reminder, Visio Divina literally means sacred seeing. So I invite you all to gaze at this image and ponder what God might communicate to you through this image as I lead us in this sacred seeing. So on the screen and on your covers of your bulletins, we have Andrei Rublev's The Trinity. It depicts the Father, the Son, and the Spirit all communing around a table with each other. The Father is on the left. His tunic has kind of a light blue color that's almost transparent, which is to communicate the mystery and the hiddenness of this divine creator. The Son is in the middle. He wears blue to communicate his divinity, and also this reddish purple, which are the colors of royalty and priesthood. His hand is the closest to the cup as he's ready to bless it and offer himself as a sacrifice. And his head is oriented towards the Father like he's submitting to him. And then finally on the right, we see the Spirit. The Spirit wears blue, again, to communicate divinity, and we also see this cloth of green that symbolizes life and regeneration. His hand is also near the cup, which suggests that the Spirit will be with the Son through his mission. And we see the Spirit's head also tilted toward the Father in submission, just like the Son. One thing that I've come to love about Rublev's depiction of the Trinity is this open space right in front. My eyes move in that circular motion from Father to Son to Spirit, and finally to this open space that invites me to partake in the environment as well. I'm asked to have a seat at the table with the triune God. And even I don't know if you can tell, but even their bodies kind of suggest this chalice shape. You can kind of see it as the Spirit and the Father make that curvature and then tapers down into what would be the stem of the cup. This is what Jesus is talking about. He's talking about us finding the space, finding that open space that's already reserved for us, to have a seat, to have a meal, and to listen graciously to what God has for us. That one thing that Jesus is talking to Martha about is seen through this image and through these stories. Gavin. That one thing that we need is to fully receive the presence of Jesus. Just like Martha and Rublev's painting, we're invited to commune with the triune God. Hospitality we see here is all about listening, about being fully present with our guest, Jesus. If we're too distracted by all of our activities or that long list of things in the back of our head that we think we should be doing, then we've really left no time to be still in the Lord's presence. We've missed the point. Jesus communicates to Martha that your value does not come from the aesthetic of your space, from the cleanliness of your home, or the tidiness of what we think our homes should look like. The ability to be hospitable means giving our full attention to each other and giving our full attention to God. We're welcome to this table, to be seen, to be listened to listen to others unencumbered, and to know that we're valued. So friends, today as we come to this table of cookies and milk that our children have so wonderfully prepared for us, I invite you to be fully present and to listen hospitably to what God is trying to communicate to you today.